Christian McCaffrey is a San Francisco 49er. The former Stanford Cardinal running back returns to the Bay in exchange for several picks, going away from the Panthers, who look to be in a fire sale, being coached by a Shanahan like his dad was once. We're going to get into what this trade means for the 49ers, for the Panthers, for the rest of the NFL, and a little bit of the NFL landscape overall in this episode of Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast. Without further ado, let's get into it. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of the NFL discussion, I wanted to thank each and every single one of you for watching this podcast episode. There's been a lot of growth recently in the viewers, in the watchers, or I guess it's viewers on YouTube. I should say on the listeners on the audio platforms and on all the followers on the social media pages. I really, really appreciate all the support you've been giving to Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast across all the platforms we have. If you're interested in more of our content, you can find us on Instagram at Lots of Thoughts Sports. Find us on Twitter at LOT Sports Pod, on TikTok at Lots of Thoughts Sports, on YouTube, Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast, same name on Facebook. If you're listening on an audio platform, I highly recommend going to check it out on YouTube. You can view a visual aspect of this, know what the face looks like that's talking to you in your AirPods or headphones every week. I would really appreciate it. If you already are on YouTube, hit the subscribe button down below. Click the little bell icon. It'll notify you whenever a new podcast episode comes out, but also all of our daily YouTube video content. We have several series going on that are doing somewhat well on the channel. Not as good as the podcast episodes, so feel free to check those out if you haven't already. Click the like button if you do enjoy this conversation on the NFL. If you're interested in the sports newsletter or the merch, those are also in the description, or you can visit our website, lotsofthoughts.godaddysites.com. There you have access to all the socials that I mentioned, the merch, the newsletter, the podcast, the YouTube, even the LinkedIn page, which I didn't mention. So lotsofthoughts.godaddysites.com. Everything I talked about is in the description of both the audio podcast and the YouTube podcast. So feel free to just scroll down there and you'll find all that. Christian McCaffrey was traded to the San Francisco 49ers, and it's a move that I thought was not possible. I thought in my mind, there were two teams that could acquire Christian McCaffrey. It was the Buffalo Bills, who seemed to be the favorite among most media members, and the Green Bay Packers, who I thought could sneak in there and nab him away. And the obvious destination was the Bills, right? They're a very complete team, very incredible, all the way through on offense and defense, but they don't have that star-studded, back. And Christian McCaffrey would have been that. He would have been a whole nother level to the offense. But the Buffalo Bills cap situation is going to be a mess next year. So I think they did it. I know the cap is increasing, but I don't think they really could have afforded Christian McCaffrey next year, along with the guys that they're already paying, and made, free agent signings to fill the holes of guys that were leaving. And so the Packers, I thought, would be in it. Aaron Rodgers seems very distressed. They lost to the Giants and the Jets. They have a game this week against the Commanders, who I think have a good chance to upset the Packers this week. There's a world where Aaron Rodgers walks up to Green Bay management and says, "Get me another weapon." And while that may seem like a wide receiver is necessary because they already have great, incredible running backs, I think Christian McCaffrey and A.J. Dillon both are incredible pass catchers. And I honestly could see a world where Christian McCaffrey lines up in the slot more than he does out of the backfield. I know that's a crazy thing to say, and the Packers aren't an ideal team, but that was the idea in my mind, who I thought could, really shock some people, shock the world, and trade for McCaffrey. And they didn't get it done. I think they'll still be in contention for if there's a top wide receiver available, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But he ends up going to the San Francisco 49ers for a second, a third, a fourth, and a fifth, I believe. I'm going to look that up just to make sure. It might have just been a second, a third, or a fourth. But honestly, I like the move for both sides. And I say that a lot. Maybe I just don't love having hot takes if I don't believe in them. But San Francisco is simultaneously a win now team, and now a team that's set up for next year. Let me see. I'm pulling up the trade. Second, third, and fourth. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Second, third, and fourth for this upcoming draft, and then a fifth for 2024. Okay. So 4 picks overall, none of which were first. The 49ers do strike, pretty well in the later rounds of the draft. So, they're a team that values those picks a little bit more, I think. But overall, I think decent value for McCaffrey, who at the end of the day is a running back, and isn't that position isn't that highly valued in the NFL, which is, its own topic of conversation that we could go into. But what the 49ers have done is really assemble the single best trio of playmakers in the NFL. You have Deebo Samuel at wideout, you have George Kittle at tight end, and now you have Christian McCaffrey as a running back. You have other pieces like Brandon Ayuk, and they have a talented offensive line, obviously, and a fiery defense, a great head coach. But I think what this does more is this allows an incredible opportunity for Jimmy Garoppolo this year and for Trey Lance next year to have every weapon at their disposal, right? This gives their quarterbacks a chance to not have to worry about, a lack of talent around them. And both of these quarterbacks need to prove something, right? Jimmy Garoppolo needs to, if he wants to be a starter in this league, he needs to prove that he could be a starter this year. His contract's up. This is last year with the 49ers, and he probably wants to start wherever he goes. So I think there's a world where he, plays well and parlays that into being at least a stopgap quarterback, a la Mitch Trubisky, but a little bit better, or even a starter on a team that's really not that great. Trey Lance, on the other hand, next year needs to prove that he's their franchise quarterback. The 49ers moved up to the 3rd spot in the draft last year, right? Trevor Lawrence was going to go number 1 overall. Most people thought Zach Wilson was going to go number 2 overall. The draft started at 3 with the 49ers pick, and their move up to that slot to draft Trey Lance. They could have had Mac Jones. They could have had Justin Fields. They could have had, Davis Mills, I suppose. They had their option at quarterback not named Zach Wilson or Trevor Lawrence, and they chose Trey Lance. And it was a major move up to get him. He was not a polished prospect. He played a lot of lower level schools. I believe he went to, was it South Dakota State? I believe it was the same school as Carson Wentz. Not a lot of high competition there, and you worry about that sometimes, but he also wasn't that polished of a prospect. And so they gave him a year on the bench. This year was the year he was supposed to come out and prove that he was starting caliber, and he gets hurt. And next year's really, really the time. Jimmy Garoppolo is not going to be here. If Trey Lance isn't the starting caliber quarterback that they drafted him to be, that's going to be an epic failure for the 49ers. And it's really going to be a black mark on John Lynch, who's done everything he can to surround the quarterback with enough talent to succeed. If Trey Lance doesn't succeed in the next year, maybe 2 to 3 years, you can confidently say he's not a starting caliber NFL quarterback, because the weapons around him that are locked up for years, can't be complained about. I'm looking at their contracts right now. Christian McCaffrey, this year he's under contract for $690,000. Steal, by the way. Next year, a $12 million cap hit. Following year, $12 million. Following year, $12,200,000. There is an option. I can't see on this screen if it's a player option or a team option. I have a feeling it's the team option. If it's a player option, it's a little, he might opt out of that, having only $36 million coming up in the contract. I think you could get more than that in the free agent market. Deebo Samuel, on the other hand, he just got a big deal, right? Yes, he has a $7 million cap hit this year, 8.7 next year, 28.5 the following year, and then there's a potential out. That's a cut for the 49ers, and then 24 million after that. He's locked up until 2025. And then George Kittle, let's see, he's in the middle of a 5-year, $75 million contract. So he's still got 3 years left on that after this one. So these 3 guys are locked up for the foreseeable future. I believe it's a cut option on McCaffrey too. I don't think this is rather a team option. I don't think it's a player option. So that would leave McCaffrey until 2025, Deebo Samuel until 2025, and George Kittle until 2025. That works out all quite well. If Trey Lance can't prove he's the guy by 2025, this team is an utter failure. And they need to, in full honesty, they need to win a Super Bowl by 2025, or this is going to be a failure. This is these guys' primes. These are 3 great weapons for any quarterback to have. If Trey Lance isn't the guy, they need to figure that out quick within the next year or 2, so they can try to get a win now quarterback in, a la Tom Brady to the Bucks, or Peyton Manning to the Broncos, right? Getting an older quarterback that can win now with this roster and these weapons is going to be a priority if Trey Lance can't prove he's worth that. On the other side of the deal, you have Carolina, who got decent value back for, a running back, albeit one of the best running backs in the league, if not the best. But this is a rebuild, right? They fired their head coach, which they should have done the day after they hired him. He hasn't been good at all. Their GM has made horrible quarterback decisions. I just like to say that. I mean, when Baker Mayfield is the guy that you have the most confidence in on a quarterback roster, maybe it's even PJ Walker at this point. Like, I think that's enough stated. This is horrible roster management. They've allocated not enough resources to the quarterback every single year. They took Sam Darnold's 5th-year option before they saw him play in Carolina. It's the stupidest decision in the world. I compare it to where the New York Giants are with Daniel Jones. They came into this year, new head coach, new general manager, right? Joe Shane taking over, Brian Dable taking over the head coaching job. They have a new regime coming in with an old quarterback, and they want to know if he can play. If coaching was the problem, or if the quarterback play was the problem. And it's been 6 weeks, and I think Daniel Jones has proven he's not bad, but he's also probably not the guy who's going to take him to the promised land, and he's not worth a long-term extension. But they didn't pick up the 5th-year option at the beginning of the 4th year. If you're not familiar, rookie contract in the NFL is for a quarterback is 5 years. And after the 3rd year, they have to decide whether the team has to decide whether they want to pick up the 5th-year option. So either the quarterback's contract lasts 4 years, or they pick up that 5th-year option, which is significantly more money, to have that quarterback's contract last 5 years. And it's a slam dunk option for a lot of good NFL quarterbacks, right? Lamar Jackson, think Joe Burrow, think, these kind of young guys, Patrick Mahomes. Well, he got locked up, for the long-term extension, but you get the idea. These good quarterbacks it's a bargain to get that 5th-year option. And then you have guys that may or may not deserve it. And that's what Daniel Jones was. So they wanted to see what they had. They didn't want to lock themselves into 2 years of Daniel Jones if he was awful with their new head coach. So they declined the 5th-year option, and they let him play out this year. If he's good enough, they'll franchise tag him. And if he's really good, they'll sign him to a long-term extension. Well, when you have an inept team like the Carolina Panthers are, they took the 5th-year option on Sam Darnold when they hadn't seen him play in Carolina. He was awful with Adam Gase. Jets let him go to move on to Zach Wilson, and apparently the Panthers thought maybe that's just because Zach Wilson is, a 2nd overall pick. They reset the financial situation. They have an option to take a highly touted quarterback, and Sam Darnold's confidence might be shot being with the Jets. That's a risk you're willing to take, and you're willing to make the trade, right? I'm going to look up the trade details just because I don't remember off the top of my head. But from what I remember thinking, if this works out, it's a great trade for Carolina. If it doesn't work out, it's not the worst thing in the world. You give up those assets. It was a 6th round pick in 2021 and a 2nd and a 4th in 2022. That's right. 2nd, 4th, and 6th to take over instead of Teddy Bridgewater, who was there the year before. When you trade for Sam Darnold, that was a lot to give up, in my opinion, now looking back on it. But if he turns out, that's nothing. If he turns out great, that's nothing to give up. However, where they screwed up is they gave him the 5th-year option without seeing him play in Carolina, seeing him play for their coaching staff. And he's awful. I mean, he's bad. And he was a bad pick by the Jets. I'm a Jets fan, right? You could see, I don't have anything Jets in the background here if you're watching on YouTube, but you see all my Yankees things. I'm wearing a Brooklyn Nets shirt. I'm a New York sports fan, and the Jets are my team. And I can honestly admit the Sam Darnold experience was absolutely awful. I almost bought his jersey. I was big on the suck for Sam bandwagon. And I thought when the draft came around that they weren't going to get him because they had the 3rd pick. I thought he was going to go to Cleveland 1st overall, and the Jets were going to get Baker Mayfield. And I was excited about Baker, believe it or not, Broadway Baker. But when Baker Mayfield was taken 1st overall, I was so ecstatic about Sam Darnold. And, little did I know that Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen would be selected later in that round, and it would turn out to be way better than either of those options. But that's why I don't work in an NFL front office. Besides the point. I'm just a fan talking to you here, and I can tell you that Sam Darnold was awful in New York, and he's been awful in Carolina, and that 5th-year option is coming back to bite him in the butt because they've got him around for longer than they want to, and they're paying him a lot of money to be there. So anyway, back to the Christian McCaffrey aspect of it. They're going into rebuild mode, right? They gave it one more kick at the can, trying to bring in Baker Mayfield. He's awful. Sam Darnold's awful. PJ Walker is what he is, backup NFL quarterback. That's probably the ceiling for him. Great story coming out of the XFL, getting this opportunity and making it to the NFL. Absolutely wonderful story for PJ Walker. Very happy to see him start. Hope he succeeds. But that's not my point. My point is they're not going anywhere. And the Panthers made a good decision to trade Christian McCaffrey when they could. They got good value for him. The next decision is DJ Moore is sitting there ready to be acquired. Robbie Anderson's already gone. He's gone to Arizona. They had to trade him given the situation on the sideline with him yelling at coaches, but DJ Moore is there. And there are some wide receiver needy teams in the NFL, two of which we've already talked about. The New York Giants have very little talent on the wide receiver core, and they look like a decent team. They're 5-1. They could make a run this year into the playoffs, so might as well, get a win now asset. And then the Green Bay Packers, I already talked about, really desperately need a wide receiver. Alan Lazard, Randall Cobb, Romeo Dobbs. It's just not a core that inspires a lot of confidence, and it's not a core that's really capable to keep up with Aaron Rodgers' arm talent. And that's shown throughout, the beginning of the season. So maybe DJ Moore could be on the move straight after this, and the Panthers could really go into full pick acquisition mode, a la the Oklahoma City Thunder of the NBA or the Utah Jazz, I suppose, now of the NBA. Hopefully, we'll see it happen. He could be a big wide receiver on the move. Another one that may be on the move, although I'm a bit skeptical, Elijah Moore from the Jets. Talked about me being a Jets fan. I figured I'd talk about this on the pod. He requests a trade in his second year after 17 games played. There's a lot of speculation. Oh, who should trade for him? Packers, Ravens, Giants, all these kind of wide receiver needy teams are brought up. He's not getting traded. He's complaining about targets when the Jets are on a 3-game winning streak. Zach Wilson's been back for 3 weeks. They're 3-0. And granted that, it wasn't against the class of the NFL, but, the Packers are a decent team. Who else did they beat? They beat the Steelers in week 2 with, oh no, I'm sorry. That was Cleveland in week 2. So they beat the Steelers in week 4. And then who did they just beat last week? Miami, of course, with their backup quarterback. But the Jets took care of the opponents in front of them the last 3 weeks. They're running the crap out of the ball with Breece Hall. Garrett Wilson looks like he's going to be a number 1 option. Corey Davis has a good connection with Zach Wilson. Elijah Moore hasn't been featured as much as he would like to be, even though he's been on the field a lot. He hasn't gotten a lot of targets. And yeah, that sucks for him. That's part of the game. And requesting a trade after playing 17 NFL games is not going to get you anywhere, because the Jets still value him as a valuable part of their offense. But an opposing team who sees him ask out, the Jets don't have leverage to trade him. Given that he was a 2nd-round pick, they're probably not going to want to give up more than a 3rd or 4th. And why would the Jets do that? He's a starting wide receiver for them, and they believe he can grow into more, pun intended. So, it blows my mind when wide receivers ask for trades. There's a very, strong stereotype of diva wide receiver, which I don't necessarily buy into. But guys like Deebo Samuel and AJ Brown requesting a trade are a lot more reasonable, given they've had, all pro level talent in previous years. You think of specifically talking about the Jets, Jamal Adams asking for a trade, right? A little bit of clown shoes situation, but he was an all pro safety. He was incredibly talented on a team that was going nowhere and was coached by an absolute imbecile in Adam Gase. I could understand it. I could understand why he wanted out. He had no faith in the team. He wanted to play for a contender. Good for him, I guess. But for a guy who's played 17 games and has 750 career yards, I don't understand it. I don't think he's getting traded. But I do think DJ Moore is, so we'll see where that ends up. A little bit on the NFL landscape. The standings are incredibly interesting right now. There's a crap ton of teams that are 2-4, 3-3, or 4-2. Buffalo's 5-1. Houston is 1-3-1. Vegas is 1-4. And Detroit is 1-4. Carolina is 1-5. Every other team is either 1 game below 500 or 1 game above 500. Oh, Minnesota's 5-1. I'm not sure if I mentioned them. And Philly's 6-0. I left out, and New York's 5-1. But these are the teams that are either 2-4, 4-2, or between. We have Dallas, Washington, Green Bay, Chicago, Tampa, Atlanta. New Orleans is just below that mark. San Francisco, the Rams, the Seahawks, the Cardinals. And in the AFC, we have the Broncos, the Chargers, the Chiefs, the Jaguars, the Colts, the Titans, the Steelers, the Browns, the Bengals, the Ravens, the Patriots, the Dolphins, and the Jets. That's a lot of teams to be mediocre right now. And in terms of just 500 teams, you have the Dolphins, who have looked very good with Tua and have looked very bad without him. You have the Patriots, who've been off and on. Bailey Zappi might be Tom Bradying Mac Jones. You have the Cincinnati Bengals, who have been hot and cold. The Baltimore Ravens, who have been hot and cold. 3-3 teams also include the Green Bay Packers, who are looking to find an identity. The Bucks, who have been off and on. The Falcons, who are surprisingly 3-3. 49ers, the Rams, the Seahawks, all of which battling to the top of the NFC West. There's a lot of mediocre football, and it's interesting to me because these teams have to separate themselves. You can't go into the playoffs with 12 teams that are I mean, I guess you could, 12 teams that are 500, but I guess you really couldn't because there's 17 games. But you know what I'm saying? This middle of the pack situation is going to be interesting as the playoffs, approach. I'd be curious to see if these teams start to separate themselves. If the Rams of the world, if the Packers of the world, if the Ravens of the world wake up and start playing better football and distinguish themselves from the other teams, I think that's what's going to end up happening. But it's an interesting landscape in the NFL right now. And it's led to some interesting outcomes so far throughout the NFL season. I'm interested to see where that goes throughout the rest of it. Well, that'll be it for this NFL roundup / Christian McCaffrey trade talk episode. I hope you enjoyed. If you're interested in more Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast content, check out the links in our description for the Instagram, the Twitter, the Facebook, the LinkedIn, the TikTok, the YouTube, the merch, the newsletter, the podcast, whatever I haven't mentioned. It's all in the description, or you can visit our website, lotsofthoughts.godaddysite.com. to access links to every single one of those items. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Lots of Thoughts, a sports podcast. I hope you enjoyed and have a wonderful rest of your day.